Hello and welcome. How are you today?
I am wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and start off with introductions. Let the audience know your name, your pronouns, and any other identities you would like to share.
Yeah, so my name is Envy Gay, they, them pronouns. My legal name is Vincent Natasha Gay, but Envy just sounds so much better, so we're going to go with that. Um, yeah, live in Columbus, Ohio, photographer, activist, writer, educator, God, I wear so many hats. It's so hard to keep track of everything. But yeah, hi.
Hello. So I do have a fun little icebreaker to start us off with. And so that's going to be if you could have any superpower for a day, but it could only be used for mundane tasks like doing chores or commuting, what would it be and how would you use it?
Mundane tasks. That just takes the fun out of it. Like there's a whole part of my gender identity is wrapped up in a superpower, and I can talk about that later. But I guess if it was for mundane tasks, it'd have to be flying, just because then I feel like I could just get everywhere easier. Um,
Mm,
yeah, that's the. I
and with
mean,
these gas prices, flying would be great.
gas prices, car price, everything. Yeah, no, just flying. Flying would probably be it. That would probably be the easiest and simplest answer. But yeah.
True. I like that one. That's actually very smart. I was gonna say like super speed for myself so that I could like do it in a fraction of the time that it would normally take me.
I would
Um,
run into everything. I know like I was like, oh yeah, I need to go to the grocery store. Let's run there. And I would like smack into a car or something. Like there's no like I no at least flying, there's not as many things up in the air. So I can like it's not as easy to hit things. Like yeah, super speed. Nah. I'd
so
I'd
true.
I'd hurt myself pretty badly.
I probably would too. Now that you mention it. Yeah, I'm one of the clumsiest people I know. All right, well, let's get into some of the regular questions. So,
Yes.
you mentioned that you're an advocate and you wear all these hats of writing and everything else you listed. I'm not sure if I could remember all of them,
No,
but
there's so many. There's so many.
right. So, what is the inspiration behind your work and involvement in LGBT advocacy?
Yeah, so originally I went to school to be a teacher, and I taught sixth grade math for 6 years until I came out as trans. And then upon coming out, my school district that I was working for started to be like, yeah, we're not going to be okay with this. And so eventually I was kind of asked to leave. And that happened right before the pandemic. And one of the things I realized through the pandemic is that no one, at least around my area, was going to hire someone who has an education background and is very openly trans. It was just not going to happen. People liked me, people liked what I have to offer, but the accommodations that they'd have to make and the fact that I'm so open about my identity, they were like, no, we can go with someone else who's not going to be a headache. So eventually I decided to hire myself and I started Mixed Gaze Creative Direction, which is kind of an all encompassing business that I've created that seeks to uplift and empower marginalized voices through writing, through activism, through artwork, through education, basically just everything that I do. Um, and so, yeah, I do a lot of different things. I wear a lot of hats. I travel around the country doing a lot of different projects. Um, yeah, I just trying to fight for this community and show people that being queer is nothing to fear. It's pretty fucking awesome, actually.
Yeah, yeah,
And that, yeah, I mean, especially with all of the anti-LGBTQ laws and especially the anti-trans laws that are being passed, yeah, it's been a lot of fighting and a lot of advocacy and a lot of going into workplaces and doing professional developments and yeah.
yeah. what specific areas or like issues within our community are you most passionate about?
Good question. Um, so did back in 2022, I started a project called This Is Trans. Um, After I had been attacked online from people within the trans community who were saying that I am not valid in my trans identity, that I was harming the community by saying that I'm trans, making it more difficult for everyone to be accepted. And I mean, the people that have this belief and believe in this narrative feel like that you have to live within the binary construct in order to be valid. I don't live within the binary construct. I present more feminine, um, mostly, but I consider myself gender fluid. I don't change my voice. This is the voice I've had for my entire adult life. I still dress very masculine from time to time. I just kind of just be myself. And yeah, so this project was born out of my photography as a way of capturing transgender individuals for who they are, not staging them, not presenting them in a certain way, but capturing them exactly who they are and empowering them to see the beauty that they are. And I take this project around the country to different art galleries, to different queer community centers, different universities, and show it off and educate the people there that the correct way to be trans is the way that's best for you. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. There's a lot of different ways that you can be that, and the only person that can validate your trans identity is yourself. Um, and in that, yeah, it's been an incredible project that has nearly 300 participants in it now. Um, but yeah, it's been a lot of fun. So yeah, that would probably be where my most passion is helping people understand exactly what it means to be trans and trying to break down a lot of these misconceptions that are out there surrounding the trans community.
Yeah, that's a huge part of what we're trying to do with our museum project as well. Is we really believe that a lot of the hatred stems from just a lack of education, a lack of maybe having met a trans person, and some of it is miscommunication or miseducation, where they've been fed incorrect like knowledge and statistics and whatever else. And so we want to kind of exist to kind of correct that, to shift that narrative back into a more positive light on our community. So I really love that there are people that are already doing that work, um, in so many different ways, as we've learned throughout this live stream. But I'm really happy to see so many people like you who are doing that.
Yeah, there are so many incredible people out here who are using their voice. And that's another thing I always like to leave people with is this idea that you don't have to be active in the same way that I am or that another, famous influencer is. You can be active and help fight for the trans community or the LGBTQI community by just doing what you do. You don't have to create TikTok videos and like do education tools. If that's not who you are, then don't do that. Honestly, the best thing that it can help our community is for more people to just see us living our normal lives, not seeking special treatment, not seeking like all these accolades, but rather just being who they are, being the 9 to 5 worker who just goes in, does their job, goes home, has a family, and happens to be trans. I mean, that's the best thing for this community is for more people to be seen like that. And you're right, it's so easy for us as trans individuals to be dehumanized. Um, I
Absolutely.
mean, yeah, so many who seek to belittle us are doing so through dehumanizational tactics, and it's because most of the time they don't even know a trans person. They see us online, they see us in the news, but they don't actually know us. They don't get to sit there. They don't have the conversations with us. They don't get to know who we are as people. And so it's very easy to just dismiss us. Whereas if we're just out there living our lives and we're just showing that we are regular, normal people, that's what's going to be the best thing for our community.
Yeah. There's some personal experience I had with that actually. I had some friends before I came out as trans who they weren't necessarily like transphobic, but they would make some sort of ignorant comments here and there along those
Hmm.
lines, and not because they really wanted to hurt someone or were they just really didn't know. But when I came out, a couple of them, they were all in the same friend group. They all kind of reached out to me at different times in the past couple of years and have been like, actually, you are the reason why I stopped making those comments because I saw you just living your life. You were the same person I had always known, exactly like what you were just saying. Like you were just being a more authentic version of yourself, and why would I want to like comment negatively about that? That makes no sense to me. And so,
That's exactly right. I mean, it is.
exactly.
It's just all we are looking for. I always say that the agenda for the LGBTQI community is to live an average life expectancy. We're not looking for anything special. We're not looking to gain more rights than anyone else has. All we're looking for is just to be able to live, to have the same pursuit of happiness that everyone is supposedly guaranteed. um, that's all we want. I mean, that's all I want. That's all I want. I just want to live here with my wife, with my dogs and my cat, and just be happy.
Yeah.
That's it.
What do you believe are the most pressing challenges for our community today?
Um, Honestly, I think it is a lot of the infighting. The
Agreed.
when it comes back, especially within the trans community, that dismissiveness of the non-binary identities and trying to validate how you're supposed to be as a person, and you see it within the sexuality spectrum too, especially when it comes to, you know, the bisexuality or pansexuality, or like all these growing numbers of different identities that are coming out, that a lot of people are wanting to dismiss it and saying it's making it harder for the entire community. It was easier when it was just the LGBT or the LG, and that adding more of these letters just makes it more convoluted and more difficult for cisgender heterosexual individuals to understand. And I can understand where they're coming from, but it's a very simple minded approach when you think of it like that. Rather, I advocate for the breaking down of all identities instead of, having to label ourselves as a certain type of person, having to label ourselves to help each other understand who we are. Rather, just I'm envy. That's who I am. This is how I present. This is how I present my gender every day. You don't need to know anything more than that. I mean, you really don't. It doesn't matter what's in my pants. It doesn't matter what hormones I take. It doesn't matter how I was born. What matters is the person I'm living as today, who I am today, how I'm helping others. Um, and yeah, that's where I feel like a lot of the breakdown comes from, is because we're infighting so much to determine what's valid and what's not, rather than just looking at each other and saying we're all valid for who we are. We're all different, and that's the beautiful thing. We've taken this dive into understanding ourselves, and we've reached this point of enlightenment where we understand ourselves so much more than we had before. So rather than trying to criticize someone for being having a different form of enlightenment than you, rejoice in it. I mean, it's truly amazing to see all these people who are just living authentically and happy as who they are.
Yeah. Yeah. I going back to the point that you said about it being more complicated, or some people thinking it's more complicated. I saw something the other day that was like, well, of course it's more complicated. Humans are more complicated than we are giving ourselves credit for. Our biology is complicated and not binary. Our thought processes are complicated and not binary. This is why psychologists exist. This is why philosophers exist. This is why, like, it's really hard to get a diagnosis in the medical field because our bodies are so different and our
Yeah.
chemical makeup is literally not identical to anyone else on the planet unless you're a twin, in which case there are still some differences. And
We are not binary beings, and we are not in a binary universe. There is no right. There's no one or another way. There's no right or wrong. There are so many different paths. There are so many different ways to be right. There are so many different ways to be wrong. There are. eh, we live in a universe of gray, and it's beautiful that way. And when we really dive in and we understand it and we accept it for what it is, we accept ourselves, and we can start to see our path through that. As Buddha had said, there's 84,000 paths to enlightenment. You can't mandate that two people take the same path, because each person's path is going to be uniquely their own.
yeah, I feel like that's how it is for transitioning as well, or anyone who's even questioning their gender, who may be cis, but they just, they're thinking about it. Um, it's very interesting to see people within our community, and that goes back to kind of the infighting. It's like everyone saying, "Oh, you have to do it this way," or like, "If you don't do it this way, you're not XYZ enough," or so on and so forth. It's it's just so interesting that we have such a unique personal experience, and we all understand like how unique our experience is to ourselves, and we can still turn around and tell someone you're not doing it right. Like, who's to say we didn't do it right then? Like, how would you
Yeah,
know? Who makes up these standards of how to be trans correctly? Nobody can do that.
no, there, like I said before, there is no correct way to be trans. Like, the correct way is the way that is best for you. That's the correct way. Um, yeah, for too long we're just mandating that there is a certain correct path, and I mean, it disenfranchises so many different individuals, and it forces so many trans individuals to be pigeonholed into a certain identity in a certain way, and having to take unnecessary means in order to be able to live. I mean, especially
Yeah.
in our older generation, transgender individuals, the number of them who had been forced to have surgeries that they might not have wanted,
Yeah.
who had been forced to take hormones that they might not have wanted, but because they were trans, that meant that they had to, in order to be authentic.
Yeah.
And yeah,
We see that in other cultures as well. I know that I'm looking at my thesis for my bachelor degree right now is on the Hijra community in India,
hmm
and something I've noticed is that you're not really respected as a true trans woman or third gender person there unless you have the surgeries and you're taking hormones. Actually, the hormones one I'm not 100% sure about, but it does seem that um, like especially bottom surgery is like almost a necessity for you to be respected as a trans person, which is very interesting to me. And I wonder if that happens everywhere. That's not something necessarily that we could
yeah.
answer, but
I mean, I've done a lot of reading and a lot of research into that as well, and especially into how trans people have lived within Hinduism, and it really comes down into the colonialization of that region by the British, and the creating of the penal code that mandated that homosexuality and any gender discrepancies were outlawed and banned. And it really comes down to that narrative that these kids had been educated for so long that there is only man and woman, that there is only straight, and because of that, it's led to a lot of that. Well, if you're going to be trans, then you have to be full, be
Binary, yeah.
complete, and yeah.
It sucks, and thankfully there are a lot of organizations in India that I'm reading about that are really trying to change that perspective and that narrative. Kind of what we're doing here at CAGD, but across the world, which is great. I'm really glad. And the thing that hurts me the most is like I'm an art history major. It makes me so sad to see that they had the infrastructure in place for trans people and their gender and whoever else, and the colonizers took that away. It was there in like as early as like 1000 BCE, and they had the Kama Sutra, which kind of explained some of these identities, which was, I think, the oldest recording of it. And just for all of that to be erased and for them to not have that connection to their own like history just makes me so sad because I love that history. It makes me happy to learn about it, and I can't imagine being disconnected from that, like my own culture in that way. So
Yeah.
on that topic, what role does education play in creating a more inclusive society for our community?
I mean, education's everything. I mean, it really comes down to knowing your history, knowing the what's truly going on, and being able to help shape us in the future. One of the things I do a lot of is um, educational programs and talks about allyship, because what I have found is that with coming from within the LGBTQIA plus community, a lot of us are calling upon our allies to stand up, to speak out, to raise up their voices and stand with us. But we're not necessarily giving them the tools to do so. We are instead just saying, hey, you need to do this, but that's it. And honestly, it can be very, very taxing and very hard. And I mean, this community is a lot. And it seems like almost day by day it continues to grow. The number of identities, the diversity within it. I mean, it can be very hard for a person coming from this very binary construct, or coming from a very conservative religious background. It can be very hard to understand. You have a lot of people who are out here being like, I want to be supportive, I want to be an ally, but I just don't know how.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I know there are quite a few of us that do these type of talks. I know there are quite a few influencers who do education stuff on Instagram or TikTok. My big thing is I've written a book called The Allies Bible that basically is that it is a tool, a guide for how someone can go from being, I want to be an ally, to being able to know how to be an ally, which is key. I mean, we need so many of these allies right now, and we need them to know the tools. We need them to have the proper education, so that not only do they know how to use their voice, but they also know how to speak up for us in situations, how to correct people when they are using homophobic or transphobic comments or slurs, how to correct someone appropriately when they're dead naming a person or using improper pronouns. I mean, that stuff is scary. That stuff's hard. I mean, I know on a day-to-day basis, I have to pick and choose whether or not I'm going to correct someone on using my pronouns incorrectly. Very much when someone uses a he, him pronoun for me, I have to evaluate, is it even worth it to correct this person? Am I going to, one, see this person ever again? Two, are they going to turn violent, or are they going to start berating me if I correct them? mean, there's a lot of things that go into it, and the same goes for our allies. I know I've talked to a lot of them who are afraid of that and afraid of receiving the harassment. And my retort to that is, well, welcome to the queer community. We all get it. It's almost like a badge of honor now. You understand what we have to go through in just correcting someone for not using our correct pronouns or our correct name. So yeah.
I think that is one thing that every single person in the trans community can probably relate to. At least, I guess I can't even say all, but I would say a significant portion of the trans community can relate to being called the wrong name or the wrong pronouns at some point.
I mean, there's so many different ways. There's so many different pronouns to use, and I even feel horrible for those agender individuals who don't use pronouns and how people react to that. I know this last weekend I ran a panel and I had an agender person on the panel with me and was having Mari, is who this person is. I was having Mari introduce themselves, and very much was like, people were like, well, how do I refer to you? Mari. That's how you refer to them. Mari. That's how. And yeah, it blows people's minds. They're like, I'm not supposed to use a pronoun for you. How could I do that? How can I speak like that? I'm like, you just use the name, Mari. That's it.
Pronouns are there to replace the noun. Have you heard the Schoolhouse Rock song, anybody? That's the whole use of pronouns. It is just there to make our lives slightly easier sometimes. And honestly, it's not that hard to just use the noun.
No, it really isn't. But I mean, it really isn't. But it is at the same time, because it is just going about how we speak in a very different way. When you're so used to your dialect being a certain way, it becomes very hard to change that dialect without being mindful and intentional at it at all times.
That is true.
And
that is true.
I mean, when I talk to allies about it, especially, I'm like, I slip up all the time. Like I will slip up with someone's pronouns from time to time. I will slip up with someone's name from time to time. The big difference is I correct it immediately. The second I say it wrong, I go, oh, shit. All right, it's sorry. Here's the name, or here's the correct pronoun, and I move on from there. And if I've done it multiple times, or I see that it might have upset them, I'll go and I'll talk to them and be like, I'm so sorry. That was my bad. I know your correct pronouns. It slipped. It was a brain fart. I apologize. And yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people may not, like, a lot of cis people may not realize is that we slip up too with each other. I know that, I did one of our Instagram posts for the live stream today, and I used someone's incorrect pronoun, and they were like, hey, just so you know, this is the right one. And I was like, whoopsie, gonna go change that right now. And, it's like, we get it. It's not great that it happened in this context necessarily, but it happens. We're human and we do
To
things
err is
incorrectly
to
too.
be human.
Exactly.
So as long as you're willing to apologize, to correct it, and to learn from it, then you're good. But it's when you are belligerent about it or do it with malice intentions is when it becomes an issue.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, we are running up on time, but everyone stay here for just a second. We have a fun surprise. So first off, Envy, are there any upcoming events or projects that you are a part of that you would like to share?
So a lot of what I do can be found on my social media account or on my website. You can find me. The best place is on Instagram at nv.gay. That's the letters nv.gay. Or on my website, which is www.vincent-natasha.com. Those are the best places to find out. My big project right now is the Allies Bible. Currently working on getting that published and getting that out to the masses. So if you're interested in that, please follow along to stay tuned for information upon that. Um, but yeah, that's pretty much it. Besides traveling the country with my This Is Trans project, that is also on my website. And if you are possibly someone who wants to bring that to your area, please message me. Go to my website. It's all there. Like I will, I want to bring it to your area. I promise. Like I want to come, no matter how big your town is or how small your town is. I want to bring it to your town. So.
Ooh. All right. Well, I'm going to drop off, and Envy is going to read you all a bedtime story.
Oh, yay! Get ready for
Yeah.
some reading with me.
All right. So I'm going to drop off, and you have the stage.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So, the story that I'm going to read for you is titled The Sandman, the Dream God, which I absolutely love the Netflix TV show and the graphic novel that it originates from. So, yeah, this just fits perfectly, right? So, yeah, just bear with me. I'm reading it off my laptop. I'll look up from time to time. But, yeah, let's just have some fun. There is nobody in the world who knows so many stories as the Sandman, or who can relate to them so nicely. In the evening, while the children are seated at the table or in their little chairs, he comes up the stairs very softly, for he walks in his socks. Then he opens his doors without the slightest noise, and throws a small quantity of fine dust in their eyes, just enough to prevent them from keeping them open, and so they do not see him. And then he creeps behind them and blows softly upon their necks, till their heads begin to droop. But the Sandman does not wish to hurt them, for he is very fond of children, and only wants them to be quiet so that he may relate to them with pretty stories. And they are never are quiet until they are in bed and asleep. As soon as they are asleep, the Sandman sits himself upon the bed. He is nicely dressed in his coat made of silken stuff. It is impossible to say of what color, for it changes from green to red and from red to blue as he turns from side to side. Under each arm he carries an umbrella, one of them with pictures on the inside. He spreads over the good children, and then they dream of the most beautiful stories the whole night. But the other umbrella has no pictures, and this he holds over the naughty children, so that they sleep heavily and wake in the morning without having dreamt at all. Now we shall hear the Sandman came every night during the week to the little boy named Yamar, and what he told him. There are 7 stories, as they are 7 days in the week. Monday. Now pay attention, the Sandman said in the evening when Jamar was in bed, and I will decorate the room. Immediately, all the flowers in the flower pots became large trees with long branches reaching to the ceiling and stretching along the walls so that the whole room was like a greenhouse. All the branches were loaded with flowers, each flower as beautiful and as fragrant as a rose. And had anyone tasted them, he would have found them sweeter than even jam. The fruit glittered like gold, and there were cakes and so full of plums that they were nearly bursting. It was incomparably beautiful, but at the same time sounded dismal moans from the table drawers in which Pilar lay his school books. "What can be done now?" said the Sandman, going to the table and pulling out the drawers. It was a slate in such distress because of the false number of in the sum, sorry, that it had almost broken itself into pieces. The pencil pulled and tugged as its string as it were a little dog that wanted help. but could not. And then came a moan from Hajar's copybook. Oh, it's quite a terrible to hear. On each leaf stood a row of capital letters, every one having a small letter by its side. This formed a copy. Under these were the other letters which Jamar had written. They fancied they looked like the copy, but they were mistaken, for they were leaning on one side as if they intended to fall over the pencil lines. See, this is the way you should hold yourselves, said the copy. Look here, you should slope thus with graceful curve. Oh, we were very willing to do so, but cannot, said Jamar's letters. We were so wretchedly made. You must be scratched out then, said the Sandman. Oh no, they cried, and they stood up so gracefully it was quite a pleasure to look at them. Now we must give up our stories and exercise these letters, said the Sandman. One, two, one, two. So he drilled them till they stood up gracefully and looked as beautiful as the copy could look. But after the Sandman was gone, and Jamars looked at them in the morning, they were as wretched and as awkward as ever. Tuesday. As soon as Jamar was in bed, the Sandman touched with his little magic wand all the furniture in the room, which immediately began to chatter, and each article only talked of itself. Over the chest of drawers hung a large picture framed picture with a gilt frame, representing a landscape with fine old trees, flowers in the grass, and a broad stream which flowed through the wood past several castles far out into the wild ocean. The Sandman touched the picture with his magic wand, and immediately the birds commenced singing, the branches of the trees rustled, and the clouds moved across the sky, casting their shadows on the landscape beneath them. Then the Sandman lifted Little Jar and up to the frame and placed his feet in the picture just on the high grass. And there he stood in the sun shining down upon him through the branches of the trees. He ran to the water and seated himself in a little boat which lay there, and which was painted red and white. The sails glittered like silver, and six swans, each with golden circlets around its neck and a bright blue star on its forehead, drew a boat past the green wood, where the trees talked of robbers and witches, and the flowers of beautiful little elves and fairies, whose histories and the butterflies had related to them. Brilliant fish with scales like silver and gold swam after the boat, sometimes making a spring and splashing on the water around them, while the birds, red and blue, small and great, flew after him in two long lines. The gnats danced around them, and the cockchafers cried, "Buzz, buzz." They all wanted to follow Jamar, and yet all wanted some story to tell him. It was most pleasant. It was the most pleasant sail. Sometimes the forests were thick and dark, sometimes like a beautiful golden gay with sunshine and flowers. And then he passed great palaces of glass and marble, and on the balcony stood princesses whose faces were those of little girls whom Jamar had known well and had often played with. One of them held out their hand in which was a heart made of sugar, more beautiful than any confectioner ever sold. As Jamar sailed by, he caught hold of a great side of the sugar heart and held it fast, and the princesses held fast also, so that it broke into pieces. Jamar held one piece, and the princess held the other, but Jamar was the largest. At each castle stood a little princess, acting as sentinels. They presented arms and had golden swords, and made it rain plums and the 10 soldiers, so that they all had been real princes. Jamar continued to sail, sometimes through woods, and sometimes as if it were through large halls, and then by large cities. At last he came to a town where his nurse lived, who had carried him in her arms when he was a very little boy, and had always been kind to him. She nodded and beckoned to him, and sang the verse that she had comprised and set to him. How oft my memories turn to thee, my own Jamar ever dear, when I could watch thy infant flee, or kiss away a pearly tear. 'Twas in my arms thy lisping tongue first spoke the half-remembered word, while o'er thy tottering steps I hung, my fond protection to afford. Farewell, I pray thee, heavenly power, to keep thee thy dying hour. And the last birds sang the tune, the flowers danced on their stems, and the old trees nodded as if the Sandman had been telling them the stories as well. Whew. Wednesday. How the rain did pour down. Jamar could hear it in his sleep, and when the Sandman opened the window, the water flowed quite up to the windowsill. It had the appearance of a large lake outside. A beautiful ship lay close to the house. Wilt thou sail with me tonight, little Jamar? Said the Sandman. Then we shall see foreign countries, and thou shalt return here in the morning. All in a moment there stood Jamar in his best clothes on the deck of a noble ship, and immediately the weather became fine. They sailed through the streets, round by the church, and on every side rolled the wide, great sea. They sailed till the land disappeared, and then they saw flocks of storks who had left their own country and were traveling to warmer climates. The storks flew one behind the other and had already been a long, long time in the wind. One of them seemed so tired that his wings could scarcely carry him. He was the last of the row and soon fell very far behind. At length he sunk lower and lower, his outstretched wings flapping them in vain, till his feet touched the rigging of the ship, and he slid down from the sails to the deck and stood before them. Then a sailor boy caught him and put him in the henhouse with the fowls, the ducks, and the turkeys, while the poor stork stood quite bewildered amongst them. Just look at that fellow, said the chickens. Then the turkey cock puffed himself out as large as he could and inquired who he was, and the ducks waddled backwardly, crying, "Quack, quack!" Then the stork told them about warm Africa, of the pyramids, and of the ostrich, which looked like a wild horse runs across the desert. The ducks did not understand what he had said, and quacked amongst themselves. We are all of the same opinion, namely, he is not very smart. Yes, to be sure, he is not very smart, said the turkey cock and gobbled. The stork remained quite silent and thought of his home in Africa. Those are handsome thin legs of yours, said the turkey cock. Quack, 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 grinned the ducks, but the stork pretended not to hear. You may As well laugh, said the turkey, for that remark was rather witty, or perhaps it was above you. He is not clever. He will be a great amusement for us while he remains here. And then he gobbled, and the ducks quacked, gobble, gobble, quack, quack. What a terrible uproar they made while they were having so much fun amongst themselves. Then Jamar went to the hen house and opened the door, called to the stork. He hopped out onto the deck. He rested himself now and looked he happy, and seemed as if he nodded to Jamar as if to thank him. Then he spread his wings and flew away to warmer countries, while the hens clucked and the ducks quacked and the turkey cock turned quite scarlet in the head. Tomorrow you shall be made into soup, said Jamar to the fowls, and then he awoke and found himself lying in his bed. It was a wonderful journey in which the Sandman had made him take that night. Thursday. What do you think I have got here? Said the Sandman. Do not be frightened, and you shall see a little mouse. And then he held out his hand to him, in which lay a lovely little creature. It has come to invite you to a wedding. Two little mice are going to enter into a marriage tonight. They reside under the floor of your mother's storeroom, and that must be a fine dwelling place. But how can I get through the little mouse hole on the floor? Said Jamar. Leave that leave me to manage that, said the Sandman. I will soon make you small enough. And then he touched Jamar with the magic wand, whereupon he became less and less until at last he was no longer than a little finger. Now you can borrow the dress of the tin soldier. I think it will fit you. It looks well to wear a uniform when you go into company. Yes, certainly, said Jamar. And in that moment he dressed as neatly as the neatest of all 10 soldiers. Will you be so good as to seat yourself in your mamma's thimble, said the little mouse, that I may have the pleasure of drawing you to the wedding? Will you really take such trouble, young lady? Said Jamar. And so in this way he rode to the mouse's wedding. They went under the floor and passed through a long passage, which was scarcely high enough to allow a thimble to drive under, and the whole passage was lit up with phosphorescent light of the rotten wood. Doesn't it smell delicious? Asked the mouse as she drew him along. The wall and the floor have smeared a bacon rind. Nothing could be nicer. Very soon they arrived at the bridal hall. On the right stood all the little mice lady, whispering and giggling as if they were making a game of each other. To the left were the gentlemen mice, stroking their whiskers and their forepaws. In the center of the hall, you could see the bridal pair, standing side by side in a hollow cheese brine and kissing each other, while all the eyes were upon them, for they had already been betrothed and were soon to be married. More and more friends kept arriving till the mice were nearly trending to each other to death. For the bridal pair now stood in the doorway, and none could pass in or out. The room had been rubbed over with a bacon rind, like the passage, which was all the refreshment offered to the guest. But for dessert they had produced a pea, on which a mouse belonging to the bridal pair had bitten in the first letters of their name. It was something quite uncommon. All the mice said it was a very beautiful wedding, and that they had all been agreeably entertained. After this, Jamar returned home and had certainly been grand society, but he had been obliged to creep under a room and to make himself small enough to wear a uniform of a tin soldier. Friday. It was incredible how many old people there are and who would be glad to have me at night, said the Sandman, especially those who have done something wrong. Oh, little Ole, they say to me, we cannot close our eyes and we lie awake the whole night waiting to see our evil deeds sitting on the beds like little imps and sprinkling us with hot water. Will you come drive them away that we may not have a good night's rest? And then they sigh so deeply and say, we would gladly pay for it. Good night, the Sandman, the money lies on the window. But I never do anything for gold. What shall we do tonight? Asked Jamar. I do not know whether you would go to care to another wedding, he replied, although it is quite a different affair than the one you saw last night. Your sister's large doll that is dressed like a man and is called Herman intends to marry the doll Bertha. It is also the doll's birthday, and they will receive many presents. Yes, I know that already, said Damar. My sister always allows her dolls to be kept to keep their birthdays and to have a wedding when they require new clothes. That has happened already 100 times, I am quite sure. Yes, so it may, but tonight is the 101st wedding. And when that has taken place, it must be the last. Therefore, it is extremely beautiful. Only look. Jamar looked at the table, and there stood the little cardboard dollhouse, and with lights in the windows drawn up before where the tin soldiers were presenting arms. The bridal pair were seated on the floor, leaning against the leg of the table, looked very thoughtful and with good reason. Then the Sandman, dressed up in grandmother's black gown, married them. As soon as the ceremony was concluded, all the furniture in the room joined in singing beautifully a beautiful song which had been comprised by the lead pencil, which went into the melody of a military tattoo. What merry sounds are on the wind as marriage rites together bind, a quite a loving pair through formal of a kid, yet smooth and fair. Hurrah, if they were of sound mind, will sing through weather prove unkind. Now came to the present, but the bridal pair had nothing to eat, for love was to be their food. Shall we go to the country house or travel? Asked the bridegroom. Then consulted the sallow, who had traveled so far that the old hen in the yard who had brought up 5 brods of chickens. The swallow talked to them of warm countries where grapes hung in large clusters on the vines, and the air so soft and mild, and about the mountains glowing with colors more beautiful than we can think of. But they have no red cabbage like we have, said the hen. I was once in the country with my chickens for the whole summer, and there was such a large sand pit in which we could walk about and scratch as we liked. And then we got into the garden and grew red cabbage. Oh, how nice it was! I cannot think of anything more delicious. But one cabbage stalk is exactly like another, said the swallow. But here We have often had bad weather. Yes, but we're accustomed to it, said the hen. But it's so cold here and some freezes sometimes. Cold weather is good for cabbages, said the hen. Besides, we do have warm weather here sometimes. 4 years ago, we had a summer that lasted more than 5 weeks, and it was so hot that one could scarcely breathe. And then in this country, we have no poisonous animals, and we are free from robbers. He must be wicked who does not consider our country the finest of all lands. He ought not to be allowed to live here. And the hen then wept very much and said, I have also traveled. I once went 12 miles in a coop, and it was not pleasant traveling at all. The hen is a sensible woman, said the doll Bertha, but I don't care for traveling over mountains just to go up and then come down again. No, let us go to the sand pit in front of the gate and then take a walk in the cabbage gardens. And so they settled it. Saturday. Am I to hear more stories? Asked little Jamar as soon as the Sandman had sent him to sleep. We shall have no time this evening, he said, spreading his prettiest umbrella over the child. Look at this. And then the whole umbrella appeared like a large china bowl with blue trees and pointed bridges upon which stood figures nodding their heads. We must make all the world beautiful for tomorrow morning, said the Sandman, for it will be a holiday. It is Sunday, and we must now go to church, to the church steeple, and see the little spires who live there and have polished the bells so that they might sound so sweet. Then I must go to the fields and see if the wind has blown the dust from the grass and the leaves. And the most difficult task of all which I have to do is to take down all the stars and brighten them up. I have to number them first before I put them in my apron, and also to the number of places from which I have to take them so that they may go back into the right holes, or else they would not remain. And we should have the number of falling stars, for they would tumble down all after another. Hark ye, Mr. Sandman, said the old portrait that hung on Jamar's bedroom. Do you know me? I am Jamar's great grandfather. I thank you for telling these boys stories, but you must not confuse his ideas. The stars cannot be taken down from the sky and polished. They are spheres like our earth, which is a good thing for them. Thank you, old great grandfather, said the Sandman. I thank you. You may be the head of the family, as you are no doubt you are, but I am older than you, and I am an ancient heathen. The Romans and the Greeks named me the dream god. I visited the noblest houses and continue to do so. I still know how to conduct myself both to the high and the low. And now you may tell the stories yourself. And so the Sandman walked off, taking his umbrella with him. Well, well, one is never to give an opinion, I suppose, grumbled the portrait. And it awoke Jamar. Sunday. Good evening, said the Sandman. Jamar nodded and sprang out of bed and turned his great grandfather's portrait to the wall so that it might not interrupt them as it had done yesterday. Now, he said, You must tell me stories about the 5 green peas that lived in one pod, or of the chickseed that courted the chickweed, or of the darning needle who acted so proudly because she fancied herself an embroidery needle. You may have had too much of a good thing, said the Sandman. You know that I like best to show you something that so I will show you my brother. He is also called the Sandman, but he never visits anyone but once. And when he does come, he takes you away on his horse and tells him stories as they ride along. He knows only 2 stories. One of those is wonderfully beautiful, that no other world can imagine anything like it, but the other is just as ugly and frightful, so it would be impossible to describe it. Then the Sandman lifted Jamar to the window. There now, you can see my brother, the other Sandman. He is also called Death. You perceive he is not so bad as they represent him in the picture books. There he is a skeleton, but now his coat is embroidered with silver. He wears the splendid uniform of Hussar. The mantle black velvet flies behind him over the horse. Look how he gallops along. Hadar saw, and that this the Sandman rode on. He lifted up old and young and carried them away on his horse. Some were seated in the front of him and some behind him, but always inquired first, how stands the marked book? Good, they all answered. Yes, but let me see for myself, he replied, and they were obliged to give him the books. And all those who had very good or exceedingly good came in front of the horse and heard the beautiful story, while those who had middling or tolerably good in their books were obliged to sit behind and listen to the frightful tale. They trembled and cried and wanted to jump down from the horse, but they could not get free, for they seemed fastened to their seats. Why, death is a most splendid Sandman, said Jamar. I am not the least afraid of him. You have no you need have no fear of him, said the Sandman, if you take care and keep good conduct book. Now I call that very instructive, murmured the great grandfather's portrait. It is useful sometimes to express an opinion. So he was quite satisfied. There are some of the doings and sayings of the Sandman. I hope he may visit you himself this evening and relate some more. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this. It was very fun to be able to read to you. Once again, my name is Envy Gay. You can find me on Instagram at envy.gay. I would love to talk to you sometime. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.